Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 91.
First podcast ever. This is amazing.
Everything feels so new. Dave's here.
This is number one. This is the first time we're putting together our first podcast.
Dave is here, as you can all hear. Dave is here. We have the ever-present and lovely sultry Asian, or Michelle Fincher. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. How are you?
Oh, I'm excellent. I am in sunny Florida, avoiding any cold northern weather, so I'm doing pretty good. And as you can all hear, of course, we have Dave Kennedy, CEO of Trusted Sec, habitual pranker.
Why do you sound like you're annoyed when you're introducing me?
Oh, what? No, I meant we have Dave Kennedy, my...
Right? Right?
Yeah.
You always give me the heck, but I bring a lot of fun and excitement, and it sounds like you're annoyed when you're introducing me. Like, this is what I get for, Mandolin Rain and the way it is. And
yes, that's exactly what you get for Hornsby.
Then I'm not going to show you a surprise I was working on then, because you guys obviously don't respect me for the hard work that I put into the podcast.
Dave, we love you, but anytime you say the word surprise, all I can think about is something really scary and terrible.
Just because I keep you on your toes doesn't mean you need to be scared. It's just, you sound like you have a fear of the unknown, Chris. We should probably have a podcast to analyze your psyche.
It might be a control issue, Dave. I don't know.
Really, Michelle? That too?
No, I'm just throwing in it's an interesting conversation, but I'm excited about surprises.
That's because the surprises generally don't involve you being like the center of a poop-throwing monkey or something.
The poop-throwing monkey was not my idea. I've been trying to solidify Bruce Hornsby for your talks at DerbyCon for the past 4 years, and I can never get him. Wouldn't it be amazing if he comes out in a piano? It'd be so good.
I don't know.
Well, listen, I'm just going to take it here that I've spent a lot of time working on this surprise for the podcast. I've actually had it done for a little bit, but I've been working with Dual Core and to get us a new intro for our podcast. And I did that because I'm good friends with you guys and I want the podcast to get better.
But we use Clutch. What are you talking about?
I know, but I figured, hey, Dual Core represents our industry. We can switch back and forth between the Clutch and the Dual Core one. And he spent time out of his day to create a specific intro for the Social Engineer podcast.
Yeah. I love you, Dave. You went and you had an intro song made without even talking to me?
Yes, it's a surprise. It's what surprises are for. And it's what friends do, man. They make the podcast better. I feel like I'm part of the podcast.
It's a surprise, yeah.
Why don't I play it and you guys can let me know if you like it or not?
I'm excited to be a part of this. Let's hear it.
Okay. It's been a lot of work, a lot of effort.
Everybody grab a friend, firewall alert. So it's back to the lab again. Patch your antivirus for the dreaded cyber pathogen. News with the clues, how attack is really happening. On the weekly episode that you rushed to get. Don't pour on the sequel cause we just ingest. Bypassed all detections, we cut the check. It's the team that you trust. Yo, it's Trusted Sec. Trusted Sec.
Huh? What'd you guys say?
Wait, did I hear Trusted Sec?
Time out. Did it just say Trusted Sec?
I mean, this is for my podcast, so I...
You are such a shameless self-promoter. That is so ridiculous. Did you really just...
Well, listen, I thought it was a good intro for this podcast. I mean, it might not be the same podcast, but I did get it done for a podcast.
It says true.
I have to say it's a catchy little tune.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm glad Michelle at least likes it.
I was really dumbfounded, first of all. I'm happy to hear it's your podcast. I was like, you went and did what? Dave.
Love you all.
I love you. Yeah. Okay, so listen. This month, we decided to have a really interesting guest on. Now, we always look for people totally outside of our industry. So we found an Academy Award-winning producer who now is in the virtual reality side of producing. And her name is Whitney Rowland. And we thought, what a great person to have on to talk about the subject of framing. Because as a producer, there'd be so much framing involved in her messaging and the way that the videos that she's producing are presented to her target audience in order to make them feel the emotions they're trying to elicit. So I'll give a brief intro, but let's get Whitney on the podcast now. Hey, Whitney. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are all of you?
We're doing great.
Doing
Thanks
great.
for joining us, especially with all the intro antics.
Well, you know what? Thank you for having me. And I liked the song Out of Context.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you very much. Yes, see?
You're welcome.
But do you notice how she said that, Dave? Out of context. And Whitney, here's what I have about you that I found a little bit interesting. So you used to be a microbiologist. Is that true?
It was. I worked for the state of Texas in newborn screening and tuberculosis.
I'd love to hear about how you went from microbiology to producer. But I have here that you worked on everything from commercials, pilots, feature films, internet series. You worked with SyFy, Verizon, Travel Channel, Comedy Central, CBS, as well as other couple networks. And I also have here that you and your team won an Academy Award for the art that you did on The Amazing Race, which is, of course, a show that most people here have definitely heard about before. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. I was on the team for Lizzie Bennet Diaries and Emma Approved as well, which were for transmedia content. And we won interactive Emmys for those as well.
So you won an Emmy and an Academy Award.
Yes.
Yikes. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It's not what I expected to be doing with my life, but it turns out to be pretty fun. You get to go places. So that's cool.
And then you somehow transitioned from all of that now into the virtual reality space.
I did. VR is completely new. And I won't lie, it appeals to the scientist part of me because virtual reality is a really immersive and exciting environment to work in. But it's also kind of an endless task list of things breaking that you have to find new solutions to fix all the time. And there's something really fun about being on the very leading edge of a technology and being able to contribute and work out kinks and work out bugs and create something that's brand new. So I like that part of VR. I like that part a lot, actually. It's very fun.
So tell us a little bit about kind of what your day-to-day looks like, because it sounds like you are involved in a lot of different things when it comes to production.
I do. I'm a freelancer. A lot of us, of course, are. So right now I'm finishing up a couple of projects. And from my standpoint, finishing up means kind of the boring parts, like closing down the budgets, getting what are called deliverables to the networks, which is making sure we have all of the sound files in the right format, making sure that we have all of the clearances taken care of. So the editing's finished. It's gone through all of its checks. Everybody likes what they're seeing. We have everything that we need for our social media campaigns so that we can turn it all over and hand it off. But simultaneously, I'm also in development on a couple of other shows. And then the development is the really fun part where you think about what you're going to do and you put together kind of an outline of what you want it to look like. You work on the scripts, you figure out how you're going to convince somebody to give you a whole lot of money to make it, like a lot of money. That's sometimes fun and just sometimes you laying at home crying. So it's both hands.
Is that part of your daily routine?
I have been on shows where it is. There's a point in production that you reach where you're so tired that you've been up weeks and weeks, and a standard day for production is a 12-hour day.
So I think Whitney would be great in InfoSec. I mean, clearly she's already got the skills, weeping daily, that sort of thing.
And I have a place I like to lay and cry. I mean, it's already ready.
Chris does as well.
I do.
You just kind of grasp your coffee cup in one hand and maybe a half-drunk bottle of vodka in the other, and you're like, what am I doing? So, it's a good place to be. My day is pretty mutable. Like it depends on what's on fire the most, and that gets taken care of first. It's definitely not a job for people that like stability. So I usually, get up, I do my yoga and sit down, answer emails, figure out priorities for everything. I spend a lot of time on the phone. I spend a lot of time going over financials, a lot of meetings. And actually, I really enjoy meetings because they're a really great chance for everybody to see each other and work out problems instead of endlessly kind of sending emails about it. So I don't know. I prefer the face-to-face, even if we're on Skype, but I think I might be a minority for that. And I just kind of work through everything. I usually knock off after about 10 or 12 hours a day of work and then play some video games and go to bed. But when I'm in production, of course, the day looks very different. Those days you come into the production office, you have a fairly straightforward and well put together schedule that everything should be on. So luckily production is very much checking boxes. And then when the box is broken, you get together and you have very little time to fix it. So you come up with another solution and you just keep going. So a lot of collaboration goes on. And at the end, we all come together and we make something really cool. And that's great.
How did you go from microbiology to producer?
This is such the best story. The whole time I have been an adult, I was also doing work in doing some kind of reenacting work. And I teach period dance. So medieval through like Regency, Jane Austen dance. I also had done some onstage work. Like I did work for street theater. I did some dance demos. And for a while, I worked for a company that I worked as an actor in a jousting show. So like guys on horses jousting. So one summer I went to go visit my friends at the Colorado Renaissance Fair, and I met another friend of mine there. And I was only doing science at this point and my occasional theatricals, just stuff for fun. So my friend I met there a year later called me up and he said, "Hey, I'm in Austin. We're doing a cinematography workshop for Kodak. Do you want to come out and be a second assistant director?" And I said, "I don't know what any of that means." And he's like, "It'll be fun. You get fed and we'll pay you." And I was like, "Sure." So I went out, we shot this music video. Kodak used to run these cinematography workshops where you could play with all of this wonderful film and we would shoot a music video and people would learn about kind of the composition and then the lighting and everything else during that process. It was a really great environment. I had a great time and I was pretty good at it. And I'm like, well, that was fun. And I didn't think about it anymore. And then 2 years later, I got a call from the same friend of mine saying, "Hey, we're shooting a web series. Can you come out to Vegas and help us out in the wardrobe department?" And he's like, "Do you know how to do wardrobe?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course." So sure. So I went out and did wardrobe and it just started kind of gathering after that. I did a wardrobe and then I worked in locations and then I got a job as a researcher for an online educational content provider. And it just started building. And so I went from part-time film work to full-time in about 2 years. And I guess now it's 7 years later and I'm executive producing and producing. So it's kind of a strange pathway, but it turns out that everything I learned from how to manage a project within the science realm is completely applicable to what happens in production. It's the same kind of idea. There's the same amount of sort of uncertainty that goes on. Like you think that this is what should happen. And 80% of the time it will, but that 20% when it goes wrong in a way that's going to take some creativity to fix it. So it's kind of a strange journey, but I'm here because of jousting.
And no, not everyone can say that.
It's true.
Yeah, that's true. I can't say that. I'm not here because of jousting at all.
I wish I could say that.
Kind of a neat origin story, like in a frame, like that I might be busting out of the frame like a comic book character with that in there. I'm not sure.
In our world, at least in social engineering, we kind of look at framing from an angle of our pretext, maybe our clothing, the storyline that we're going to have when we're either sending a phishing email or trying to break into a building or something to that effect that's going to get us past the normal security protocols, whether that be a security guard or someone's phishing education or whatever it is, to get them to do something that they shouldn't do. That involves everything from, just our theme, our storyline, our clothing, all of that. And then we call that framing. So how we frame that message and ourselves will either help or hinder our target audience to believe us or not. So I would imagine in your world as a producer, it's pretty similar, of course, with different goals, but it must be pretty similar in all of those thoughts when you're choosing maybe the right camera angle from the 50 that you have or the right scene. How much involved is framing in when you're producing your videos?
Framing is pretty much everything for what we're doing. And it's an interesting process that it goes through, coming through the producers to the directors, and then down to cinematographer, and then all the way down through the crew. It's really important that the entire group is on the same page for what we're trying to do. So when you start a project, you have the producer team that's usually on first. And we're the ones that initially set like the mood, and we have the script and everyone has an idea sort of what we want it to look like. And we bring the director in, and the director is the one that is ultimately in charge of where the camera is looking. So the director is the one that drives the ship as far as where your eyes are, in traditional media, at least. The director controls what the camera framing is, collaborates with the cinematographer or the director of photography to get it lit the way that they want. There's department heads that take notes from production, of course, for wardrobe and art department and hair and makeup, sound department, VFX. Everybody works together off of the same documents, essentially, that we all share. So it's a huge team of people, just like you guys do, that create an environment, and then we do our very best to maintain that environment the entire time. In traditional media, you're constrained for your actual physical framing by what the camera is seeing. So anytime you frame a shot, you're looking at it from that one or maybe two cameras. Larger, like reality type shows, you'll have multiple cameras, but they're all still looking essentially in the same little box, which allows you to cheat a little bit. And you can use a lot of magic to make things within that tiny box look different. The VR world is a little different from that, because instead of having that tight frame to work around that constraint, we now have the entire sphere around us that we need to worry about. That makes things a little more complicated, because you have to build the environment that previously was kind of only visible in our heads and in our minds when we were putting everything together. Well, now we have to create the entire universe that the story is occurring in. No matter what direction the user looks in, they should be able to see something that maintains that framework that we've put up before, which can be extremely tricky just for a variety of reasons. The users are going to interact with that environment a lot differently than they would with a locked off frame in traditional movies or television.
The video that you get has already been through all those other crews you talked about. So now you're taking basically a product that you don't have much control over from the beginning and trying to make it look the best way possible as a producer.
In a way, yeah. I hire in the people that I think are going to maintain our framing the best, to make sure that we maintain what either our client or whomever is trying to create. We will make sure that we stay to that. But it is extremely collaborative. And everybody has their own opinion, of course, about how it should look and how it should happen and what people are wearing. But the good thing is, because it is a hierarchy, this is one of those reasons that hierarchies sometimes are very useful. Whenever, like, there is someone at the top that can say no or make a decision. And that's really useful. So like, no, we're not doing that. No, put the red shirt on, or, no, let's just stick to this. It's a collaborative, but not at the same time. So
what things, when you are producing, what things do you take into consideration that will build the biggest emotional connection between you and your audience?
That's a very good question. And it very much depends on, what the message is, what you're trying to do, what are you trying to get them to experience. I shot a commercial last year for Kellogg's. They had a pre-Olympic campaign that they were doing, and we shot a 360-degree underwater video with an Olympic swimmer. When we started thinking about what that was going to be like, what are we trying to get through to them? What are we trying to get them to experience? And like you said, how can we do it? And what we wanted for them is we wanted for them to be able to be in the pool. Their campaign was centered around the phrase, what gets you started? So it was them starting their day and being on the starting blocks. So we had to think about, how do you visually get that idea, that start idea across? How do you show that to people? So you go through a really kind of fun storyboarding phase where you draw out different ideas about what it's going to look like. What's our movement going to look like? What is everybody's emotion going to be during that? And a lot of times it's dialogue driven. So you can use dialogue to bring your emotions into place. But a lot more times you use a lot of other clues. You use the setting, you use the set, you use the music, you use the sound design. to try and draw people into specific parts of the narrative that you're telling. And you want to highlight specific parts of the narrative using different tools, essentially.
So out of curiosity, Whitney, how much flexibility would you say that you have in using that frame? Because I'm relating this to sort of our job, and oftentimes we're pretexting and we don't want to stray too much from, the story that we're trying to set up, because what we're trying to do is execute something where we don't want our audience to think that much. We don't want our audience to think about the request too much or to find us unusual, because what we want them to do, what we want to test is whether or not they'll comply in a way that's insecure. So I guess I'm curious, do you have flexibility with respect to your framing? Have you seen things develop over time, or do you tend to stick pretty closely to sort of how it was set from the beginning?
It depends partially on the client, just like for y'all. But I think that we have a lot more flexibility than you guys might. We're automatically given permission many times just by nature of what we're doing to push a boundary a little bit farther. The initial stages of pre-production and planning are usually pretty boundary pushing, just to sort of see how far we can get before someone will say like, okay, no, we need to stop. We need to pull that back a little.
And I know very little about production. And so I was just thinking in terms of, it seems to me that in media particularly, you really have it in your mind, though, sort of what emotion you're trying to evoke or what story you're trying to tell. And I was just curious, from your end of it, have you seen things develop or go off the rails or become something completely different? And is that okay?
It is okay. And it does happen. Usually when that starts to happen, everyone sort of feels that it's happening. There was a story we were going to tell, and we started to tell that story. And then in the process of doing it, we discovered that it wasn't turning out the way that we wanted it to.
Sure, that happens in security work to us every day.
All the time.
All the time.
And sometimes, interestingly enough, especially with documentary formats and reality shows, you don't necessarily realize it until you're in post-production, actually editing it together. Because you thought you were shooting one thing, and so you went and you did your stuff and you got your shots and you did your thing, and then you take it in later and you look at the footage and you're like, actually, this isn't what we shot at all. We thought we were shooting a documentary about people that ride horses for a living, and in reality, we were shooting a documentary about this one person who also rides horses for a living, but has all of these side difficulties. And that's more important than what we thought, or more interesting than what we thought we were shooting in the first place. So you can pivot the whole project sometimes to accommodate what you have.
Oh, so you mean like you would change the whole theme of your project just because when you look at the video, you're like, wow, we got some stuff that we didn't plan.
And sometimes it's possible. Sometimes you can set that footage aside and be like, all right, I'm going to produce the thing that they gave me money to do. Sometimes your clients are not going to be amenable to you changing things. Sometimes they are. In feature films, for example, you're pretty much need to stick to exactly what they said. There's tons of money and they're like, we want you to shoot giant robots punching space aliens. And you're like, right, shooting robots punching space aliens. You get a little more leeway when you're doing documentary work, and you get a little more fuzzy leeway when you're doing reality, because you have to see what comes out at the end. So you have to be flexible. You're like, oh, well, okay, I guess we'll do this. But then again, depends on your client, depends on what your ultimate goal is. But it's happened with movies too, with feature films, where people shoot a feature and then they get into the editing bay and they realize they actually shot a completely different feature than what they thought they had. So they end up re-editing it, and it happens with surprising regularity.
Yeah, that has direct correlation to our industry, because that happens to us all the time. We'll think we have the best plan on earth and it's going to be solid and there'll be no holes in it. And then we approach the building and everything changes because you got the one like security guard he dreams about like being super cop, and you have to change your whole process like on the fly. Like what you thought you were going in to do is completely different than what you end up doing.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you think you're a singularity when you're in a certain industry, but to hear you say like, man, you went to go shoot this one documentary and you came out with a whole separate story. That's pretty fascinating.
It happens a lot. I actually think it's pretty exhilarating when it does, as long as your client's going to be okay with it. Sometimes it's really stress inducing because you sit home, you're like, oh no, I don't think we got what they wanted. And I'm sure you guys have that too. You're like, oh, that didn't go.
Every single day. Yes.
How do you handle that? I mean, do you just reshoot it, or do you just edit it to be the kind of the way that you want it to be? I'm sure you have a certain message that you want to get out of what you're doing. And if you don't get that message or the reaction that you're looking for, how do you kind of spin it to be that way?
There's really only a couple of options for it. And you mentioned both of them. One of them is to do reshoots. Reshoots are what we want to avoid because they cost a lot of money, usually, because you have to go back and seamlessly recreate whatever you had before. So that continuity wise, you can't tell that we just shot something and put it in there that we shot 6 months after we shot the first part. So that can be very expensive. It's a lot easier and usually more economical to try and fix it during the editing phase. And when you do that, you can sometimes you can do what's called ADR, additional dialogue recording. You can re-record dialogue and have someone off screen saying something and looking at someone that's on screen to move the story back in a different direction. You can use editing to steer the story back to the point that you want to, or you go reshoot, or sometimes you just decide to cut that part completely because occasionally the scene is just unsavable. And when you cut out whole sections of the story, then you have to go back and adjust everything around it to make sure that the story still makes sense. Because I'm sure we've all seen films that clearly there's something missing in here. Like there's a major plot thing that just doesn't make any sense. Sometimes that's because whatever was in the middle just wasn't working and they had to cut it. It's very much up until the very final delivery. It's very much a very, very fluid piece of work.
That makes sense. And that's very much how we are in the security industry too, especially if we're, trying to social engineer somebody. I mean, coming up with a pretext that, needs to be believable in some way, it can completely change and morph, based on who we're dealing with, who we're trying to go after, or maybe just even, situations that we didn't account for when we're going and building it.
I think that flexibility is super important. Your job, especially being very flexible coming into something, I think is really important.
Let's take a quick break to discuss what's going on with Social Engineer this month.
So much,
Michelle. It really is crazy. Actually, looking at the events calendar, let's just talk about corporate events. So, April 6th, I head down to Philadelphia. I'm giving the keynote speech at Secure World. So that if you're anywhere near Philly, if you're going to that, stop by, say hi, and I'll be down there for that event. I'm really excited about that, actually. Did a Secure World last year, had a lot of fun. So looking forward to this event too. And there's some information on the .com about that there. We got a bunch of emails on this one, and really this is the reality. People have asked, are there really only 2 APSE events for 2017?
2017, yes.
It's not an SE gig, 2 public events left. The first one is in Bristol, UK, and that's 5 through 9 of June. And that class is about half full right now. So I'd say if you're interested in that, you definitely want to get in there. That's full 5-day class of APSE. And then our next one is Black Hat, which is the APSE at Black Hat, which is a special edition for them. It's a 4-day edition. We cut out day 2, the OSINT day. But you have all 4 days of APSE with Michelle and I there, and that's July 22nd through 25. There's information on our website about both of those events. And I think the last I checked, we're about 35% full on the Black Hat class. So normally that class sells out and then people are telling us sorry to get signed up earlier. So if you're interested in either Bristol or Vegas, you might as well get signed up quickly. Now, we also we'll be at DEF CON doing the SE Village this year. We have a ton of stuff.
Oh boy. I'm tired just thinking about it.
I'm actually with you this time because, see, I had this great idea, which translated into more work, which was to add a new event to DEF CON.
Yeah, this is actually going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I am excited. So let's start with Thursday. We have Mission SE Impossible. That's back again for the second year. Third year? I don't know.
Third year. It's the third year, and sharks with frickin' lasers. So what more could you want?
Yeah, that's right. So we have sharks with friggin' laser beams on their friggin' heads, again, for MSI. Last year, we had so many signups, we couldn't actually take even 10% of the people that signed up. So if you want in on that, get there early Thursday. We'll be talking about that and getting signups. Friday starts the SECTF, And I cannot tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I am very excited about this year. So we have so many signups right now, it's not even funny. And we have something exciting. This is the first year ever where I would say more than 70% of the signups are women. I'm really excited about that.
This is going to be a really good year.
Yeah, because you ladies are just better at it. Every time we have ladies on the SECTF, it just is so much more fun. They follow the rules. I mean, believe it or not, they actually follow the rules, right? They don't try to break them and then play dumb. They actually follow the rules. So please keep signing up.
I don't know that women are necessarily rule followers, but these ladies do tend to follow the rules.
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they just follow rules blindly. It's just they just the little things we have, like don't victimize a person. Don't do anything bad to the person on the phone. They follow those rules nicely. We've never disqualified a female from the competition. So really excited about that. Then we have the SECTF for kids also on Friday. That's a change. Normally that's on Saturday. You'll find out why. And then we have the SE speech, the human track, there Friday night. We'll have 5 speeches in the evening starting at, I think, 4 p.m., I think is where we'll have them. And that's exciting for us because we had so many people fill out the CFP already that, again, it's going to be a hard year. And we're not even, we still have 2 more months. We're giving them 2 more months to fill this out. So we're going to have a lot of good choices.
We've already started the judging process. So if you're interested at all in speaking in the village this year, please enter as soon as you can, because they're actually starting to pile up.
And the good part for that, from what Michelle was saying, is that if the longer we have to think about you, the better it will be. So... And then Saturday, I'm back with the SECTF again. And then our new event, which is the SECTF for teens. So all of our kids that used to come to the CTF for kids many of them have grown up and become too old. And they were complaining year after year, I really want to do this. Some of them even came and sat in the room just to watch the SECTF for kids, even though they couldn't compete. So we decided that this year we're going to hold a teen event. So it's going to be for 13 to 17 years old. And the signups will be coming. Actually, they may be out shortly after this podcast. You want to be watching the site if you're there. And then Saturday night, we have the human track again, 5 more speeches to close that night out. You may be able to get invited to our private party. Not sure. You have to beg Michelle. And she's really hard. She says no way more often than she suggests.
All last minute invites, I guess, will come through me.
Yeah, all last minute invites because I am way too weak. Then
I'm taking bribes now.
Then Sunday, which is our final day, is our SE podcast, bright and early Sunday morning, which we all love. So I'm not going to tell you any more about that because we'll see who the guest is. We'll see what kind of excitement we're going to have this year. But super happy about what's going on out there at DEF CON this year. Then, as if we didn't even take a break, because, we don't. We come back and a month later, we're at DerbyCon. So DerbyCon, let me just pull the dates up for that there while we're talking, because we just got the email on that. I'm sure you all saw that today. Dave released the updates about DerbyCon 7.0 called Legacy, September 20th through 24th. We hope we'll be chosen to do our training there. Now, we're not 100% sure. We never assume. But if we do get chosen, then we will have our OSINT class, which will be the only live OSINT class we'll have for the whole year. That's not private. That's a public class taught there. And we'll be doing, and this is exciting, the SE Village at DerbyCon. So we're going to have Mission SE Impossible, Can You Fool the Polygraph, a miniature SECTF. Yes, you heard me right. Miniature SECTF. And we're bringing back the SE panels, which everyone seemed to love so much there. We already have Bobbitt and a couple other people involved. It's going to be pretty awesome at DerbyCon in September. So that seems to be what's going on now. I don't know. Am I missing anything, Michelle?
Let's hope not, because, we're already smoked.
Yeah, and that's September. I'm sure there'll be some new things to announce with October and November coming up. But that is our news for now. So if you have any interest in seeing us or hanging out with us, come to one of the cons and keep sending us those emails, guys and gals. We love the feedback on the new format. We're glad you're liking it. So we'll keep this up as long as we can keep Dave in control, which you know what that means. We'll try. Okay, let's get back to our show. it sounds like you'll also use a good amount of misdirection if that occurs. If you have an error, like you said, you had someone off camera, you kind of put a voiceover to bring back the theme that you were looking for.
Yes, we joke a lot of times that all of what we're doing is just complete misdirection all the time. Don't look at this. Look at us over here. Look, look, look. And that becomes really important in VR because you have to make your viewer look in a certain way to get the story, and they're not going to look there. Like, I guarantee you, no matter how important and how shiny a thing that you initially in your first iteration, you're like, oh, they'll totally look over there at the blinking light. No, they're not going to look at the blinking light. So you have to figure out how to direct them to look at the thing that you want them to look at. Like, look over here. Hey, check it out. Check it out. Dancing girls.
That is eerily similar to our industries. Like Dave said, sometimes, we're in a situation unexpected. We have to figure it out. And misdirection will be a great tool that we'll use all the time. Look over here, not at me. I don't want you looking at me because I have a goal that you're not going to want, but go look over here and hopefully that will distract you enough so I can accomplish my task.
Use that in stagecraft, on live theater as well, like where you got to change the scenery over here. So in order to make people not look at you changing the scenery, you put something else up over here, like a dancing girl or some music or a light or something to try and draw their attention over to that instead of what the machinery is happening over here. So misdirection is kind of our bread and butter.
When I think of misdirection, I always think of Apollo Robbins. I mean, absolutely, pickpocketing somebody through misdirection. He's the best at it.
Yeah. Do you ever see that video where he actually changes clothes while on stage doing the presentation?
Yes.
If you haven't seen that, Whitney, you should check that out. He's actually on stage doing a speech, and in the middle of his speech, he changes his shirt, he changes tie, he takes his vest off, and at the end, he's like, "So how many people remember me wearing this?" And like nobody, everyone's like, "No, what are you talking about?" And he plays a video, and it shows him slowly by misdirecting, by saying, "Look over here at this," and then he pulls a tie off, or "Look at this," and he changes his hat, and you're like, "Holy crap!" The guy just literally changed his whole outfit in front of me, and I had no clue that was occurring.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, like how you get that to work and how you can use in traditional media, you can use the camera to misdirect sometimes, but even in scenes where they're showing you everything that you need to see, they'll hide something by creating a misdirect. It's like if somebody's going to get stabbed with a sword later, we need to show the sword. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, you always have to show it somehow, but they hide it in the scenes. And it's so much fun to hide things and hide sounds and hide people and all sorts of little clues to what's happening later. And you can hide it in the scenes that are before it. And then even then in big action scenes, like obviously when you're choreographing fight scenes, for example, misdirection is a big deal. Like it's all misdirection, but you have to make it look like that you're not. It's just fun.
So is VR more challenging? I kind of assume that you have less control over where people are looking or where people's attention is directed, or is that not true?
It is absolutely true. And you have almost no control over what they're looking at. So if you're building a 3D environment, for example, that they're interacting with, like a Vive or an Oculus, and it's an environment that they're going to be moving in, like for a video game, you have to tell them where to look, because normally when you play like a video game, even for 360 video, it's kind of more game theory than it is for normal media. Because when you put somebody in front of a computer and you tell them like, okay, well, this is the video game environment, you need to move around it, they'll like just start clicking on things. They know how this works, right? They'll start clicking on stuff and trying to find out what they can move. When you put them into a virtual reality setup, they don't do that, because it's real enough that they feel like that they're in that place. And so they automatically place their own rules for the world into that environment with them.
It's like a change in psychology of the person. That's interesting.
Yeah. So for example, I worked on a project that involved a table that you could interact with that would call up all these kind of holographic images that you could work with. And it was on the Vive. And the Vive, you have these they're called lighthouses that you put up in your room so you can physically walk around the environment in the VR world, which is pretty great. But if we put people who had never done VR before and we put them into that situation and we gave them the controllers and we're like, so you're going to want to point at this and click it. And they got point and click, no problem. we would start the experience and there's this table in the room. And they're like, okay. So they'd walk up to the table and they would be playing with the stuff. And we'd tell them, it's like, you can go to the other side of the table, right? Every one of them will walk around the table, even though it's not real, because their brain is like, that's a table and I can't walk in there. So they'll go around it. If you set up an environment like where we had one scene for something where they were going to be up in the air and we couldn't use it without placing a platform because people would get motion sick or scared and wouldn't want to stand in the air because they were too high. You could conceivably in the VR world walk off the side of a building, and unless we've programmed you to fall, you can just float in the air, but they won't do it. People will come to the edge of a building and lean over with their head to look over the side of the building like you would in real life, even though it's completely virtual. It's really, really amazing to watch people interact with this environment because it's so different, but the same. So trying to teach them to look places is a lot harder. You have to think as an actual person instead of as a gamer or like someone consuming media. You have to think, well, I'm standing here. What would I look at first?
If you approach that like a gamer, it seems like you would expect someone to just know they can walk through the table, and then maybe you would limit their ability to progress in that environment because you've only made it something that seems impossible to a normal person.
Well, I've died so many times in games that I'm a cautious gamer anyway, unlikely to jump off a cliff, even in the virtual world. So
it's been very interesting too, because when you bring game theory into it, you start having to make the control devices also become part of ways that you direct or misdirect people. Like if they're point at the right thing, you need it to vibrate, for example, the controller, so that they know that they're doing the right thing, because they don't know. It's because your brain reacts like you would be in a new place. Like if you're in somebody else's house, you're not going to walk around. I mean, maybe you would walk around and just start taking things off of shelves.
Dave might.
Hey.
I don't want to be speaking for anybody, but Dave might.
I mean, but in games, of course, we're programmed to do that. Because of course we're going to go walk and push A along everything because there's got to be a thing here. But they won't do that. And when you do a 360 video, when you're trying to tell a story like that, then we get into this whole stage issue where we need them to look a certain way, because they can't, at that point on a 360 video, they are not really controlling the action. They're riding along. It's like a rail game, but they still need to look where the things are happening, which is hard too, because you sort of want something happening on most of the sides. So if they're looking somewhere, they're not seeing blank space, but there's always somehow someone's going to look at the one place where there's nothing there and be like, I don't see anything. I'm like, turn around. Turn around.
$1 million we spent is to your right.
To the right. The Kellogg's thing that we did, which is online actually. I will send you guys the link later if you want to see. You can watch it on your phone. YouTube has a 360 option where you can use your phone and physically move it around to interact in 360 spaces, which is pretty neat. But we had a setup in Union Square where people could put on the headsets and experience the commercial and, go in the water. And it was, we'd seen it by this point, 10,000 times. So of course we knew where to look, but gosh, getting people to look, even when we thought we had edited it in such a way that it would be logical where you should maybe look to see the action happening, it was a crash course in that maybe we needed to take it out into the public earlier than we had before, because, we would have to remind people that they could look up or look down or look behind them. It's like, look behind you. They're like, oh, what? And, oh. So it was really, can be very frustrating.
So when you're producing VR, is there one sense that creates more emotion? Like, is visual more powerful than auditory? Or is there just one sense that you focus on the most? Or is it just the blend of them together is what creates the emotional content that you want?
I think with VR, the visuals are a lot of it, but I will say that I think sound becomes more important in a VR space than it does in a traditional media.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Sound is something that we use in real life to help alert us to what's happening around us. So when you're sitting in a traditional theater and you're facing forward, even though you can have 360 and anamorphic sound, it doesn't clue you to anything, really. right? Like, oh, I hear it behind me, but you know, if you turn around behind you, it's, you know, it's your cousin. There's nothing behind you. In a VR space, if you hear something behind you, if you look behind you, right, there should be something there. There's going to be something there. So the sound becomes much more emotionally attached to what you're doing than it would be if you're just watching something straight ahead.
That's interesting. Haven't thought about that piece, but that makes a lot of sense.
In a perfect world, we'd also have like smell-o-vision and air currents.
I'm sure that's coming.
It is. It is. NAB had some pretty interesting choices for some VR accessories. So there are setups now that you can walk on a treadmill, like an omnidirectional treadmill, so that you can get a sense that you're actually walking within a game space that's hooked up to your headset and sorts of things like that. It's very interesting.
Man, you're going to need like another room in your house just for a game system nowadays.
Oh, pretty much.
Yeah, I've seen some initiatives. I think it's by the Army where they do training where they use the omnidirectional treadmill. And it's all very interesting. I think what it does is it's some sort of pseudo combat training. So I think it has a lot of interesting applications.
I think you're right. I think I know what you're talking about. I've seen it too. I wish we were all in the same room so I could bring you something so you can play with it. Because initially you look at it and you're like, this is not immersive at all. How could this possibly be immersive? And then you put it on the first time and you're like, oh, okay. Because just your eyes, they buy into it immediately. Is it something about controlling where you're looking with your head instead of a controller? I think is a lot of it too, because now you're physically involved in what's happening. You're auditorially involved all around you. And then you're visually involved as well. So a whole bunch of senses are firing at once.
Sure, you're getting feedback from your body, right? Yeah.
You fool your brain, right? I mean, you fool your brain 100% because if you turn your head and your vision turns with it, your brain says, I'm in reality, which is the whole sense of that.
Yeah, and it can have some really interesting, I have an embarrassing number of videos on my cell phone of people trying VR the first time. Because I love, like, unabashedly, like, not even laughing at them at all. I love people's reaction to it. Because it's so childlike and amazement. Because, you know, you're in a whole new universe. You know, I'm in a different place. You know, that I'm underwater and there's fish. You know, and like there was one part of a thing we did for GE where you could walk around and under this underwater area. And if you brought the controller near the fish would run away from you. So people would just stand in the underwater and play and chase fish. And I'm like, this is great. They're chasing fish, you guys. That's just like not even thinking about the fact that they're wearing a giant clunky headset and standing in front of all of their peers.
Yeah, I've never done it.
I'm trying to sort of relate this to the work that we do. And I think there are times in our work that the personal connection is very important because what we're trying to do is create some kind of connection or rapport. And there are times when we as people sort of fall flat and something doesn't go the way that we want. And I'm curious, as you're developing VR in your past experiences, have you had things kind of go wrong or fall on deaf ears or not have the impact that you thought it might? And if so, do you have any, ideas as to why that is? Because we're always kind of looking back at our fails more often than not and saying, what did I do wrong? Why did that person not react the way that I thought they would? Can you think of any stories or anything that you could relate to our listeners?
It happens a lot, actually, where you feel like you didn't make a connection correctly, like you didn't quite get across what you wanted to do. It's usually a narrative, I've found, issue where for some reason, the stakes weren't right. Something happened that either you don't care, you care for the wrong reasons. There's some sort of issue where they're just not buying into it. It's part of why there's so many test audiences before a big feature comes out, because that's one of the things they're looking for is like, are you feeling emotionally engaged with what you're seeing? And sometimes you just can't see it until somebody else looks at it, which I'm sure you guys have that all the time. Like, I thought this was fine. And then it just didn't, I don't understand why they didn't go for it. And I think for us, it's either a narrative issue or something happened on screen that completely pulls you out of like your suspension of disbelief. Like bad CG can do that.
I'm just thinking about, movies that I've seen that I feel like I should have liked but didn't, had characters that weren't relatable, or like you said, something that's really incongruous, it just doesn't fit. And so it kind of completely pulls you out of I'm being told the story mode.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out what's wrong. Like, I don't understand, why is this not working? In a couple of instances that I just was going to give an example and of course forgot, it was something as simple as the CG components weren't lit properly. So the CG environment that was pasted onto the real life, like when they composited it together, the lighting was different. And like, you can't necessarily look at that and be like, I don't believe that, but there's something, your eyes pick that up and you're like, something's not right here. And as soon as that happens, it breaks the realism for you. And now you're out of what you're doing. You're not in the story anymore. I'm watching a movie. Just a lot of tiny details, I think, sometimes. So either it would be a visual issue or there's a narrative issue where you're just not involved emotionally with anything that you're seeing on screen and you just don't care. Like, I don't care.
It's always interesting to just hear someone else's job that not related to our industry at all, and then to see, we're always kind of surprised a little how much similarities there are in both the struggles and the successes with cross industries. So this was a pretty fascinating conversation. If people wanted to follow you or know more about you, where can they go to do that?
They will be able to go to my website soon. It's actually, I just tore it all down in a rage, as one does, creative rage. And I took it down. I had joked before. I'm like, of course, the minute I pull my entire process, everything down, something happens where I need to tell people about myself. But I'm working on my new website. My company's name is called Counts to Nine, COUNTS 29. And that's because I was a dancer before I did anything else. And normally dancers only count to 8. But because I do Irish dance, which has a 9-step sequence, I can count all the way up to 9. So
I can only count to 8.
Is that the number 2 and the number 9?
It will be, but right now it's all spelled out. Counts to 9. COUNTSTONINE. And like I said, it's a disaster area right now. So, but stay tuned. It'll look lovely soon. And I will be able to put up some of the 360 videos so people can go there soon and take a look at what that environment looks like. And most of them, you don't need anything special to watch. Anything that's on YouTube for 360, you can experience with your phone. Same thing with Google Spotlight Stories. You can use your phone to watch those. So that's pretty nice.
And I found a lot of info about you on the IMDb also.
Yeah, I need to work on that too.
Yeah. All the different shows you worked on and things like that are all out there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We have a lot of very avid readers that are part of our listener base. So is there a book that you've read either recently or in the past that you'd recommend?
I just reread one of my favorite books in the world that I always go back to when I'm feeling like I need a refresher on why I am where I am, going where I am in my life. And that's a book called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I cannot recommend it enough. It's an allegory for life and finding out what you should be doing with yourself.
The Alchemist by Paulo
Coelho. But he wrote another book called Veronica Decides to Die that's really fascinating, about a woman who attempted suicide, didn't have it go right. And then when she wakes up, she finds out she's alive now, but she will die in 7 days. So it's like her philosophical. Wow. Yeah, it's heavy stuff, but pretty interesting. He's a really insightful writer. I recommend his things.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that recommendation. Again, can't thank you enough. This has been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on today, despite your super busy deadline schedule.
It was a delight to be able to set some budgeting aside for a bit. So thank you for having me.
Well, another great show. I really liked her.
I think it was really interesting just because of the similarities, but it also gives me a better appreciation for even bad movies, because it sounds like movie making and just, in general, commercials, whatever it is, it's really hard. You have to account for a lot of things.
And now with everything going VR, I can't even imagine, I didn't think about that aspect that she said, you're not just trying to make them focus on the screen right in front of them, but there's a 360 degrees that there has to be something there for them to look at.
Yeah, I'm not a good VR candidate. I think I'd be one of those ones falling down and throwing up. So I'll leave that to the young folks.
I really want to try it. I haven't tried VR yet. And I really want to try it. the last time I saw VR, it was one of those like ride a roller coaster, but it was like 8-bit and it did not feel virtual at all. There's actually one in Universal Studios down in Florida that is a roller coaster where they give you VR headset when you're on it. So you actually ride a real roller coaster, but you wear a VR headset. So you're riding a roller coaster through some virtual thing. I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like too much to me. I'd rather either go to a movie or do the real thing. Nothing in between.
I like the idea of VR to try things that you could potentially die in real life.
So you don't want to jump out of an airplane.
Well, I do want to jump out of an airplane, but I don't want to die. So jumping out of an airplane in VR may give me all the thrill of having done so, but without the risk of actually croaking. So I don't know. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, that's smart.
Death-free excitement. Well, anyhow, we'll have all of her stuff in the show notes and that great book that she recommended. And Dave had to bounce, so we don't have him here with us. But you can follow Dave on Twitter at Hacking Dave. You have Michelle at Sultry Asian, myself at Human Hacker, and our corporate Twitter at SOC Engineer Inc. You can follow us on our websites at social-engineer.org and social-engineer.com. And if you're still using IRC, we are on irc.freenode.net channel social-engineer. And that is about all we have until next month. We'll see you.
Stare into the embers on the 1st of November and remember you were born.